It's Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Rogue Tulips Consulting. We're here with Season 7. So glad you're joining us. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp, CAEACNP, and I'm so glad you're here for this exciting year of so many great topics, so don't forget to subscribe. It's Ethics Awareness Month, and we're wrapping up March with 2 back-to-back episodes about ethics. This week, I'm welcoming 2 colleagues from the Ethics Committee at ASAE, Lynette Bradley-Baker and Joy Davis. And we're all going to talk about ethics questions that every professional should ask. You don't want to miss this one. It's Monday, March 24th. Welcome to episode 278. Hey everybody, it's Monday, March 24th, and that means it's time for another episode of Radio Free 501c. Thanks for joining us as we are now finally in spring here and almost at the end of the first quarter of the year. Hi, I'm your host, Cecilia Supp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Consulting, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. And to our global audience, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be. If you have not yet followed us or subscribed, please take a moment and do that because we have an exciting year ahead of us of even more first-time guests like we have this week. Now, March is Ethics Awareness Month, and so we all try to bring that to top of mind. As a member of the ASAE Ethics Committee this year, it's really on my mind. So I'm really pleased to invite 2 of my colleagues from the ASAE Ethics Committee here today to talk with us about ethics questions every professional should ask, not just the people in the C-suite. But before we jump into our topic, I would like to welcome Joy Davis and Lynette Bradley-Baker to the show. They're first-time guests. We're really on a trend with that this year. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So let's start with Joy. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself?
Well, hello to everyone. I work for the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists, and I oversee, among many things, the member experience, which means I'm thinking about how members are building their relationship with us, and we're building a relationship with them. So ethics is really important in that part of my work.
Well, that's great. And I know on the committee, you always have great insights and observations for the rest of us to consider. Now, Lynette, welcome to you as well. You're another first-time guest with us. Please say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much, Cecilia. Hello, everyone. My name is Lynette Bradley-Baker. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Engagement Officer at the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy. And part of my responsibility is to lead our staff that are responsible for our communications, membership, and transformation center. And so certainly with communications and membership, those cross-cutting issues that involve ethics, them being cross-cutting teams, they often have some ethical issues that they have to contend with. So very glad to be here.
Well, and let's just go ahead and get right into our topic. As you both know, I am also a person who has a certain interest in ethics and a certain level of expertise because we offer our course through our education program. And I write and speak on it as well as do both of you. Let's talk about the issue of confidentiality. People like to talk. We all do. We hear something and we say, oh, we won't repeat it, but then we do. So what are some questions that we should keep in mind when we are dealing with something that's confidential? And let's just kick off with Lynette and then ask Joy for her input.
Sure. Confidentiality is certainly something that every workplace has to be concerned about, and especially in association management. I think in those instances when a member may ask us to a question or ask to see information or hear about how a decision was made, whether that's through an award or nominations process, you might ask yourself, well, why wouldn't I tell them? And certainly there are confidential aspects, things that should not be shared in both of those situations. If you have someone who has put themselves forward as a nominee, for example, for an elected position, and if they were not chosen, I'm sure that they would not want that information to be shared. And certainly the staff members or any other members of your association that are involved in those types of review and decision-making processes should understand the importance of keeping that information within that group and not sharing it. So that's just one example of things that sometimes we as staff members of associations have information or privy to and should not share even amongst other staff members. It's sort of on a need to know basis.
Yeah, and that's hard. I remember the day after our committee meeting last week, and I was in a networking call that I participate in regularly. Everybody's like, well, what happened at the committee meeting? And I said, well, it was good, but there's some things I just can't tell you right now, but it was a good meeting. So it is hard not to, spill your guts about things, but we can all learn how to do that with practice. So Joy, what are your thoughts on that topic?
I think transparency is really important when you're developing a culture inside of an organization. The members and the volunteers especially need to feel like they can trust you and they can trust what you're doing. And transparency goes a long way for that. But sometimes we face situations that we have to consider how transparency is going to affect the parties involved. Lynette mentioned, someone who applies for an award. We don't say who didn't get the award because we don't want to embarrass people. But we can talk about how many people applied for the award this year. We can talk about other things that help the membership understand what's going on. But I have to tell you, Lynette, as we were talking about this, I remember a situation in which some VIPs in the membership were demanding to know why a decision was made about someone who was not advanced. And no one knew because we couldn't tell anyone. And the interesting thing about that was they felt they had the right to know. It is really important to establish an ethical environment with your membership and your volunteers so that when it's a really tense situation, it's already in their minds that, well, they never reveal this information. We're not supposed to know this. We don't talk about this part of things. Things would have been a lot easier if those VIPs had in the back of their minds, oh, well, that's not something they talk about to anyone who wasn't on the selection committee. So creating that ethical environment, it comes from the transparency and thinking about how the whole organization operates, not just us one-to-one. Although I've been on those calls and I have wanted to talk one-to-one about something that just happened to me because I'm so annoyed. And I try not to do that. I don't always succeed.
No, but, well, we're all a work in progress, right? It's like,
Absolutely.
even if we're really highly aware of ethics and committed to the practice of ethics, we're going to stumble. We're not going to be perfect. And that's not what we're looking for. But what I'd like to point out too on the topic of confidentiality before we move on to our next topic is that is one of our standards of conduct at ASAE is to maintain confidentiality in our work, the work of members, or like for myself as a consultant, maintain my clients' confidentiality, which I do. I got to say, sometimes it's easier to maintain client confidentiality than my co-members, I'll be honest, because we're people. We love to talk. What's the oldest hobby in the world? People watching, because we've been doing it ever since we start living together, right?
It's really good to have a trusted confidant who can help you think through problems. And sometimes you find yourself, and that's where I'm like, can I really talk to this about this person? What are the effects of it? On the other hand, this person could help me work this out. And for me to have a better answer for my team, you get into these situations where I need to talk to someone who runs a program like this and find out what they think. And that's been incredibly beneficial.
Oh, I think that's great advice because you don't have to give all the confidential details. You can just ask a broad question. Yeah, that's a really good tip. And I'd like to move on to questions about fairness. I think fairness is a tough topic because, again, I think a lot of times humans equate fairness with equal. And fairness is a judgment call based on knowledge and experience, whereas equal is a mathematical equation. So being able to be fair about being fair is something that we have to learn over time. So, Joy, what is a question that we should ask ourselves about fairness?
The one that I find myself bringing up the most with board members and volunteers goes to the issue of people who are not in the room and who can't be. We make a lot of decisions about people who are not with us. We're deciding how to spend their dues dollars. We're deciding what's going to happen, and they will never know those decisions were made or how they were made. They'll just receive what happened. So I'm always thinking to myself, if I do this for one, can I do this for all? Because if I can't do it for all, I have to stop and really think about what's going on there. Why wouldn't I be able to? How can I represent the whole membership in a room when we're trying to make a decision that's going to affect all of them?
And I think that's really a good way to look at it. I guess I never thought of it that way before, because we're making these decisions about how to spend the money that comes in, because that is our job. But you're right, the members don't necessarily get to hear those discussions or decisions. So, Lynette, what do you think about that?
No, I think it's a very good point, and it's the resources and the time spent, right? And so oftentimes there will be segments of our membership that want a new program or want to add to a process. And while that might be a great idea and it might be very useful for that membership, you do have to look at the allocation of resources and time. And I think it's part of our responsibility as staff members to ensure that other staff members are aware of these requests, and not just to make these one-off promises that, yes, I'm going to take care of this for you. Because oftentimes when we're talking as a holistic group, or we're conversing about the needs of our members or requests of members, we find that sometimes there are other groups that want some of the same thing, and we can really start to analyze what would make the most sense, what would be the most fair in terms of how we allocate our time and our resources. It comes up all the time, and I think that's where communication and transparency too, as well, with the group, within the groups, we as staff, we're the glue that puts the members together, and it's our responsibility to not only be transparent and fair with our members, but also with our colleagues as well. So if you can broaden the approach to certain asks or certain requests, I think that makes it much more fair and in some cases equitable to everyone involved.
Yeah, that's a great point, because sometimes we can't share everything even with our work colleagues. And so
Right.
that aspect of the fairness of sharing information and decision-making process is always something people are like, well, why didn't I know about it? Why wasn't I on the memo? And people assume negative intention, whereas if we would all just talk to each other, we would understand it's not. It's just, we need to know what we need to know, and everybody doesn't need to know everything. And I do want to mention again, since we're all on the ethics committee, fairness is also a standard of conduct for ASAE, because our mission is to help people practice ethical thinking and develop an ethical mindset. And so that's one of the reasons that we talk about the standards of conduct on a regular basis. So, and one of the tests that ASAE has, and I would love to hear what you both think about this. So, Lynette, we'll start with you. The test, like, how will this look in the newspaper tomorrow? If this were a headline, how will I feel about myself when I look myself in the mirror tomorrow, when I make this decision? So what are some other things to consider when we're making a decision that's public facing? Because those decisions, the ones that other people are going to see the effect of or the outcome of.
Absolutely. I think there are many aspects to think about with regard to that question. Certainly the responsibility that we have to our members and to the mission and the vision of the organization comes into play. Accountability as well. How did we get to this point in time where there shouldn't be a dichotomy in terms of what our members know and what the public knows. And I think ultimately it comes down to trust. It's ensuring that as staff members that we are focused on the mission and the vision. We're focused on providing the most useful products, programs, and services that will advance that mission and also help our members advance. And certainly working with our leadership to ensure that that level of trust, those conversations, so somewhat what we touched on before, that those aspects that do not have to go outside the room, that we take responsibility for that, and we become that trusted source. I do think that sometimes there may be, as people take leadership positions, we as organizations, we have the responsibility to remind them what the level of trust that they have been given, and that there are many duties that they have as board members, because I think sometimes, and I know we're sort of going off topic from what your question was, but sometimes that becomes issues that we might have, things that might get out into the press, come from leaders, ill-intentioned or not, and we need to ensure that everyone is aware of what their level of responsibility is.
That's right. And I really don't think that's getting off topic, because I think we've all had to deal with that at least once, right? A member talking to a reporter or blasting something out on social media, good, bad, or ugly. It's like, well, maybe that wasn't supposed to be released yet, or, you're just mad. And so you're sharing an angry comment, and people do that. That's why we're called the relationship industry. We have to bring people back, right? We have to maintain those relationships. So, Joy, what are your thoughts on that topic of the public-facing decisions that we need to make sometimes?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. How will other people feel about this when they find out we made this decision? Because we tend to think of that, and it's one of the many questions that are like this. We tend to think of it as a business decision when it's actually an ethics question. We think of it as, how is this going to affect the brand? That's what the communications team is going to say to themselves. But really what we should be asking ourselves is, how does this reflect our values? Every ethical decision, every ethical disagreement is really a conflict of values. Does this statement, this thing that we're doing, reflect the values of the organization and what we have promised people we are? That's a very ethics-minded focus on things. And there are a number of questions that are like that. We tend to fall into this space of, oh, well, will this cost us a lot of money? Will this actually? No, I think you should be going back to your values and what the organization is, and then building your decision-making out from there.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good way to think about it. And again, I don't think most of us think of decisions as having an ethical aspect. I think every decision we make has one. Every action we take as well has some sort of an ethical we need to consider. Yeah. And some of them are more challenging than others. It's basically, are you doing the right thing at the right time in this situation for the most people? That's what we teach in our ethics course. Be the conscience fiduciary for all the people involved in the decision, or who will be affected by the decision, because that will help you make the better decision to help the most people at that time. So, Joy, I want to stick with you to kick off this part of the conversation. So, when we were prepping for this episode, you mentioned something called the veil of ignorance. And I think that is a fun name. I love that. So could you explain a little bit about what the veil of ignorance is and how it applies to ethical decision-making?
Well, now that you've asked me about it, I can't remember the name of the philosopher who first stated the veil of ignorance, but this is an oldie but a goodie, folks. You can Google this one. The veil of ignorance is the idea that if I didn't know any of these people, and if I threw a blanket over everyone and moved everybody's seat in this discussion around, would I still make the same decision? And it's a way of testing yourself. Are you making this decision because of the person who's in the chair? Or are you making this decision because of the structure and what is happening? And you sometimes don't realize that we talked about this earlier this week. I think I brought this up. We build systems with the assumption that the person who is going to be in the role is the best possible person for that job, instead of building systems as if seat, and we have to be concerned about what they would know, what kind of training they would have, what kind of steps they would take. That's a veil of ignorance problem when we're building our ethical communities and our frameworks. We have to think as if, what if anyone was sitting here? Would the answer be different?
I really like that, and that makes a lot of sense. I've never thought of it as the veil of ignorance, but I
Promise
really
I didn't
like
come
that.
up with it.
Yeah, well, we'll have to look that up and look up that philosopher, but it reminds me of something that happened in my own life. I realized I was really more of a grown-up than I thought when I could make an objective decision about a person I didn't like.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to be negative about people we don't like. It's very easy to say, no, they got what they deserved. But if you can look at that person and look at their situation, as you said, Joy, and say, well, no, what happened to this person is not right, and we need to fix it. And it does matter if I like them or not. I think that's a great example of the veil of ignorance, because a lot of times in associations, what are we doing? We're catering to the people called the big wigs, the important board member or the important donor. And because they have that role, we might make a different decision because of who they are, as opposed to, well, this is the right decision at this time in this situation. So I think that's a really good point to bring up. Lynette, what would you like to add on that?
I completely agree. And when Joy and I were talking about this, we were talking about it in terms of getting the same question from two different people. Maybe someone that we know very well in the association, a leader, someone we've worked with for many years, and someone that is a new member that asks the same exact question. Should your answer be the same? Yes, it should. It goes back to that trust and the fairness aspect of it. And it is very hard, Cecilia, to your earlier point, not to want to provide more insight, more background, more cadence around the issue, or in terms of what your response is. But it is our responsibility to be as transparent yet consistent in that transparency as possible. And it is very difficult to do. I find myself sometimes in those situations and just have to remind yourself that this is your job. You're trusted to have this job and to have this information, and consistency is our responsibility.
That's right. Yeah. And I don't know why this is reminding me of part of the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, about the monster who would put a towel over his own head because he thought if he couldn't see you, you couldn't see him. So maybe we could also think of it that way. It's like, put that towel over your head before you make the decision, right?
Exactly.
That's good. And then there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about and make sure we cover. So what are some protocols that we could apply for our own ethical decision making? Because it is something we can learn, it's something we can practice. We can ask a series of questions, or we could ask certain people at work. What are some things? And let's kick off with Lynette and then get Joy's input on this. So Lynette, what do you think? What are some protocols or questions that we could continue asking ourselves?
For a lot of the processes and decisions that we have to make, I think having protocols, having guidances, SOPs, those types of things to ensure that we apply the same process across a variety of members, situations, et cetera. And so I know as I continue to mature as an association management professional, the importance of documentation and really setting those protocols I hate doing it, when you have to actually sit down and do them, but it makes things so much easier in the long run to know, hey, okay, it's that time of year, let's pull this out. And not only setting them, but continuously reviewing and revising as maybe new situations come into being that you didn't anticipate, I think there needs to be that constant review. So it's sort of that continuous professional development or continuous professional process that we have in this. But most associations, I believe, try to do their best job in looking at these situations with the same stance, with the same perspective. And I do believe that guidance, protocols, SOPs, those types of things really help help us in keeping our eye on the prize.
It really does. And you know what's great about that is it's a leave behind if you ever leave that position.
Absolutely.
And people can understand your thought process. I used to memorialize everything when I was on staff, and most likely because I was usually a solo department. Like I'd be the only person in the chapter relations department, for example. So I better write everything down in case I get hit by that killer bus that we're all talking about and trying to avoid, right? So I think that's a great point. It can seem tedious, but so useful. Like if you're on vacation or you have to take sick leave or something. It's really good for our members and our colleagues who might have to be filling in for us when we're away. So Joy, what are your thoughts on protocols and standard operating procedures?
Well, I agree with Lynette entirely, including on how annoying it is to have to do all that. But yes, it's great for operations. The thing I would add to that is you should continually say out loud about ethics why you are doing something. We shouldn't do that because not all the members would be able to have access to that, and it's treating someone with a special. We shouldn't reveal that information. It could affect a member personally, but we can reveal X, Y, and Z. If you are continually talking out loud with the people around you about the ethical underpinnings of the why, it will help them remember those things. It just becomes built into the culture of the organization. That is how we think about this problem. So I think you need to do that. And then if you do face a brand new system, like you think you've got a problem and wow, we've never done this before. I have been reminded repeatedly that everything has been done before. You have to go and find someone who's already met this challenge. They may have done it in a different industry. They may have done it with a different system. When I needed to design a new system for how we were going to manage a product inside of our organization, I actually started with the editors-in-chief of our publications because they already had a well-built system for how to evaluate content, how to decide what to put in front of people. And I could riff off of that to build a different system entirely. So it can be humbling to find out that you're not as unique as you thought you were. But it also means there's probably an answer out there that's easier than you sitting in a room staring at a piece of paper.
That's right. And as Shakespeare said, there is nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun.
We do variations on themes like we do in music. So that's a really good point. And again, another reason to memorialize things, why you do stuff, how you came up with an idea and a process, because then people don't have to look too far. I know this always a funny thing for me. When I was on staff, like I said, memorialized everything. And over the years, I've met people who came after me at those organizations, and I haven't been there 10, 15, 20 years. And they'll say, oh, I still use all your memos. And I'm like, I wrote those 10, 15 years ago. Why are you still using them? I guess they stood the test of time, and informed their work and their decision making. So that's another good reason. So we do have a couple minutes before we wrap up. So I'm going to throw out a kind of a surprise question. Now, one of the things we do like to promote is the standards of conduct for ASAE for a lot of reasons. It's because it's a great touchstone for ethical decision making. So there are 7 of them. You can find them on the ASAE website. We know what most of them are. So I'm going to ask, I'll share mine first to give you some time to think about it. What is your favorite out of our ASAE standards of conduct? What is your favorite standard? I'll start to give you a chance to think about it. My favorite one is the newest one. It was just added in 2022, champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. I love that because that's an important policy that we have at ASAE. It drives our community. And it really does have a lot of wonderful outcomes for everybody who's involved. So that's why it's my favorite, because it really brings together people in different ways and opens our mind to team building. Like we might look in different places for people to add to our team and look for diversity of experience and knowledge. So I won't call on somebody. Does somebody want to jump in and say what your favorite standard of conduct is?
I think all of them really relate to the different aspects of what we talked about today. I think the one that speaks mostly close to me is to act fairly. And that goes back maybe to my consistency norm or my top five in a certain other element of how we can measure ourselves. But acting fairly, I think it for me and for all of us, if we do that, then we don't have to worry about coming up with different stories for different people. It really is about consistency. It's about being that beacon of trust. Sometimes being that go-to person and keeping that information confidential, not sharing it. There's so much that goes into that word fair and fairly that it really does speak to me. And that's just part of a core of who I am in terms of my own moral compass and my own mission statement, what I try to do throughout, not just in my professional life, but also personally.
That is great. And I love how you relate it to your personal mission statement in the world. I love that. So Joy, you can't say that Lynette took yours. So what is your favorite standard of conduct?
I'm going to be very honest here. You threw in a surprise question. I was like, I haven't read those right before this call.
Right.
Thank God for Dr. Google. I will tell you, I'm a big fan of the fairness one, but I think mine is honest conduct. We handle the dues for the members. We manage the board and keep them informed. We are very often the only connection between our consultants and our members and all these people. And we have to be honest brokers of information. And we have to make sure that people are not just set up for success, but that they are treated honestly and fairly, because they can't see what we can see. And that's a huge responsibility for us. So I think that's the one I'm going to pick from my quick Googling.
Yeah. No, that's great. And nothing wrong with Dr. Google, right? That he can answer a lot of questions for us. So that's great. Well, I know that we could probably dive into each and every one of our 7 standards of conduct and be here for another couple hours, but we do have to wrap up this episode in celebration and recognition of Ethics Awareness Month. So I want to thank you both for joining me. So Joy and Lynette, I would like to ask each of you, what is the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to reach out and talk to you some more? So Joy, let's start with you and we'll wrap up with Lynette.
Talk about it. Talk about it out loud. Name the ethical concern, look for the ethical concern, and talk about it with the rest of your team and with your volunteers and with your members. Because if you keep talking about it out loud, it becomes built into the fabric of the association.
That's a great thought. And how could people get in touch with you if they wanted to contact you directly?
Well, Dr. Google, obviously. I am on LinkedIn, Joy S. Davis on LinkedIn. Look for me there.
Excellent. Thank you, Joy. Lynette, what is your thought that you would like the audience to take away?
Just thinking about the various opportunities. I don't want to say issues because they really are opportunities that we have in our workplace. We have the opportunity to build that ethical workplace. And so with that comes trust and transparency. And I think ultimately leads to better decision making. So sort of piggybacking a little bit off of Joy's, but talking through these things, all of these issues or all of these challenges, if you want to call it that, will lead to better decision making, which will lead to getting you closer to ensuring that you're meeting your association's mission or your organization's mission and vision. So just keep talking about it, as Joy said, and continue to build that trust and transparency. I've enjoyed our conversation. You can reach me on LinkedIn as well at Lynette Bradley-Baker. There's no hyphen in between Bradley and Baker.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you both. It's always fun to have colleagues from a committee you work with to come on your show. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. So again, don't forget to subscribe or follow us. If you'd like to learn more about the ASAE standards of conduct, you can find those at the ASAE website. If you're interested in ethics and you're an ASAE member, check out our Ethics Collaborate community. Post your questions, comments, concerns, and we can have a conversation about it. And I also would like to encourage you to contact the ASAE Ethics Committee if you have questions or looking for information about ethical decision making and creating that ethical mindset. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out our website at roguetulips.com and look at our services page. If you would like to get some CAE education, especially on ethics, we offer that every month. Check out our education page and learn more about our CAE courses as well. You can find this podcast episode on our podcast page as well as our other ones. If you want to be a guest on the podcast, fill out our application form and we'll contact you. Also, check out my weekly blog, What the Heck I'm Thinking About This Week. So that's all for now. On behalf of Joy, Lynette, and myself, we'll see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together. Thanks.